What's up, fellow internet denizens? There is a problem that I have noticed on Booktok. People have been classifying books by tropes, which I am fine with, but this has led to authors writing stories based around clusters of these tropes, which has become controversial. I'm a little late to the party on this, but I've decided to give my 2 cents because why not? I actually have a couple of ideas on how to fix Booktok. So let's talk about it, shall we? Spoilers for Assistant to the Villain by Nicole Maehrer, Lightlark by Alex Aster, and Monstrous Regiment by Terry Pratchett. All writing is based on ideas. Many kernels of these ideas have been done before, whether you know it or not. What's important is how you spin that idea into your own web. These little nuggets of ideas are called tropes, and people have been noticing them for a long time. Look into the Arne Thompson Uther Story Index, which was a fairy tale classification index that was written in 1910. If you want to see how even back then, we were categorizing myths and legends. Some tropes are broad and thematic, such as evil kings, plot armor, and slaying dragons. These are mostly older, but they are highly influential on most media. Others are small, hyper-specific details and trends that only appear in certain types of media, such as shadow daddies, fancy and magic being like radiation. Many of these come and go, but some have a lasting influence on the fantasy zeitgeist if you know where to look. For example, fancy and magic was the inspiration for how wizards originally functioned in D&D, and you can see echoes of it in how they learn and memorize spells even today. Tropes will often find their way into your writing whether you plan for it or not. They often work best for me personally when they are either subverted or blend into the world so well that I only realized I've encountered them when I shut the book. When I first downloaded TikTok in late 2020, I followed a few reading-based accounts, and I noticed a large focus on certain phrases like enemies to lovers, hurt comfort, and so on in the tags. Now, these didn't originate on TikTok. These tags appeared jointly on TV Tropes and Archive of Our Own. TV Tropes is a site that catalogs tropes in media. You can find anything from eye scream, or torture specifically involving eyeballs, to the hero's journey, and it's a nice place to explore if you don't know the name of something that's annoyed you since you were 10, like plot-mandated friendship failure or third act breakup. Now, Archive of Our Own is a little bit more relevant to this due to the amount of fanfic connoisseurs who roam Booktok, and this is likely the source of several trope names such as Shadow Daddy. AO3 has a tagging system where you can search the site for fanfics of your favorite universes and real-life events. On the one hand, I think that people knowing what they're getting into as they go into a book can be good. Now, I think that Booktok does have its benefits. Queer fiction and young adult fiction have become more popular because of it, according to a Slate article by Radameli de Leon. People are now able to search for any trait a book contains, from character realizes he's asexual to character has OCD to character has a dagger to their throat. I think that this is a net positive. Humans love categorizing things after all, and we all have favorite categories. The use of these categories has likely been one of the reasons that Booktok has gotten so big, and therefore it is likely the reason that more adults are coming back to reading. Furthermore, I could have used tags like this when I was a teenager, learning about what I liked in books and who I was in real life. However, I have also seen some recent problems arise with this trend. I mentioned before that there has been a trend of basing the core of your story on trending tropes. TikTok user Viva Fallastin Lean, among others, has noticed that ever since Booktok users started tagging tropes, some authors have been focusing more on writing stories around these tropes rather than with these tropes. Victoria Mayu writes in her article for The Broken Plate that most of these books feel like filler, written just to get to the money shot, the trope everyone knows and loves. I've noticed this in a couple of Booktok books that I have personally read, but I am going to go one step further here. It's not just one money shot they're going for. It seems to me that the authors like to fill this space with more tropes that were trending at the time of writing. Now, at my game shop, there is a goal system for Magic the Gathering night, where the more goals you fulfill each game, the more credit you get, and at the end of the month, the more prizes you win on prize night. This list changes every month, and people adjust their decks accordingly. This is similar to how some Booktok authors seem to treat their craft. It seems they try and check as many boxes as they can in order to appeal to whatever is trending. And the 2 examples that I am bringing up today have done so in a rather careless manner. This has led me to conclude that writing a story purely based on trending tags without considering them through a critical lens is a bad foundation for what could otherwise be a good novel. Let's talk about some examples then. Our first will be Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Maehrer. I found out about Assistant to the Villain when a relative sent me a copy for Christmas in 2024. They enjoyed it, and it had a cute frog emoting on the cover, so I gave it a read, and I hated it. Then I looked it up and found out it was based on a series of TikToks. While most of the TikToks do not specifically name any tropes, they do outline a few. These include, but are not limited to, Grumpy Sunshine, Shadow Daddy, Born Sexy Yesterday, and Bumbling Sidekick. I actually enjoyed one or two of these skits, although she does that millennial, well that just happened thing way too much. What kind of book would come from such sketches? Well, here's a brief summary. A bumbling woman named Evie Sage loses her job as a blacksmith, gets hired by the villain who runs this office and does little to no actual villainy apart from torturing the king's guards and sometimes smuggling. Hijinks ensue. Turns out Evie's dad is faking his illness, stalking her with ink magic, and thwarting the villain's poorly described operations. It also turns out the king was the real villain all along, and this whole thing just feels like Overlord, but if it was written by a horny teenager who claims to be gothic despite only really liking one post-hiatus Fall Out Boy song. I was not a fan of this story, and neither were a lot of people on the internet. The problem here is that Maehrer had an idea for TikTok skits. Now, there are some skits that translate very well into longer form media. After all, there is a reason that everyone's dad keeps quoting Wayne's World. Maehrer's skits are around 45 seconds long and all focus on either the main character walking in on her boss being sinister, or the main character complaining about Becky from HR. The only real actor is Maehrer, and she only plays Evie. There's really not that much to squeeze from these. Furthermore, the writing feels like Maehrer just didn't really know who she wanted her audience to be. On the one hand, she makes dirty jokes and puts Evie in compromising situations, but on the other, Evie acts and thinks like a 12-year-old would, and the protagonist isn't the assistant to an actual villain because the author was too scared of alienating her audience. The result here is something that is written in too childish of a manner to really be appealing to your average romantasy enjoyer, sewn together around 45-second fragments of ideas. Now let's talk about another example that has gained popularity relatively recently. That would be Lightlark by Aster. Aster is also notable for posting TikToks about her story ideas, as well as outright listing the tropes she enjoys the most. Before Lightlark was published, Aster would post TikToks asking her fans if they would be interested in a book with various traits. She hyped this book up, listing more and more things she would include, such as a queer character, spice, and several tropes. These include, but are not limited to, death game, enemies to lovers, banter, knife to throat, tending to wounds scene, he falls first, who did this to you, shadow daddy, and to quote Aster, enemies to lovers that ends with him angrily confessing his love because he thought she was in danger. Once Lightlark was published, many people who had been hyped up by these ended up being miffed that some of these things that were promised here were either missing or in the background. A lot of people picked it up after the initial complaints came out to see what all the hype and disappointment was about. Many of these people, myself included, found a tropey mess with terrible descriptions. Now, Lightlark is about an island that appears once every 100 years. Every time it appears, all 6 rulers must attend this death game festival, and the winner gets to rule Lightlark while it disappears. There are no real rules or points to this game. However, one person must die at the end of this one in particular in order to break all the curses that everyone has been suffering for the past 500 years. The rulers all rule various lands with various types of magic and curses that balance out said magic. And the magic system is a total mess that I already talked about in another video. Isla is a ruler who has no powers or curse, and she has to navigate the political landscape of this island. So as the story goes on, everyone has secrets which get revealed. For example, Grimshaw, the Nightshade ruler, blanked her memory in order to make her forget she was dating him before the story, and Azul, the Skyling ruler, planned on dying in order to stop this curse, potentially to see his husband again. It turns out Celeste, the Starling ruler, and person I guessed was the villain about a quarter in, is actually someone who was mentioned offhand in basically a footnote and caused all the curses 500 years ago, and she is killed and the curses are broken, and Isla opens a door and they live happily ever after. Or do they? This feels like it had potential, right? What happened? Well, right off the bat, the descriptions are awful. A cliff is a cliffy thing. The sun is a yoky thing. Though this turns out to be plot relevant, albeit in one of the stupidest ways possible. I am trying to be lenient here because Aster claims to have aphantasia, but at the same time, 2% of the population has it, in fact, so there are bound to be some fantastic authors who can't see anything in their mind's eye. Furthermore, again, the magic system is not very well thought through, and we end up with curses that should have wiped out populations a long time ago, especially the wildlings, and poorly defined rituals. But this isn't what I'm here to talk about today. The part that angered me the most about Lightlark is that most of the tropes in this book feel less like a moment and more like a box that Aster needed to check off in order to meet a quota and satisfy the audience that she had hyped up. I feel like she promised too much in her TikToks, realized this, and tried to sneak in as many tropes as she could before shipping it off to her editors, who were probably yes men anyway. She promised enemies to lovers, but neither leg of the love triangle has any real animosity towards Isla apart from seeming secretive. She wanted he falls first, but didn't have the time to show that in the narrative because all of the other noise, so she just had Grimshaw reveal that he dated Isla in the past and erased her memory. She wanted queer characters, but didn't have the wherewithal to have the characters themselves speak about who they were, and instead have other characters bring it up as an offhand comment. My point here is that Aster promised so many tropes that she had likely seen trending on TikTok as she worked on Lightlark, but she was unable to give them due diligence and ended up just stringing together vibes and stuffing them in wherever it felt necessary. Now that we've gone over some examples of trope-centric writing, you're probably wondering who can do this well, if anyone. My answer to this is people who know what they are doing. One of the best examples that comes to mind is Sir Terry Pratchett. When he wrote his Discworld series, he snuck a lot of tropes in and flipped them on their head. One of my favorite examples of this is this segment in The Light Fantastic. Now, there is a tendency at a point like this to look over one's shoulder at the cover artist and start going on at length about leather, thigh boots, and naked blades. Words like full, round, and even pert creep into the narrative until the writer has to go and have a cold shower and lie down. Which is all rather silly because any woman setting out to make a living by the sword isn't going to go around looking like something off the cover of the more advanced kind of lingerie catalog for the specialized buyer. Of course, this is a humorous subversion of a fantasy trope that was popular when The Light Fantastic came out in 1986, the kind where scantily clad barbarian women would be marauding around and falling in love with some oily, muscle-bound brigand. Helena, the character described in this passage, is described as beautiful later on. She just chooses to dress practically for her job as a marauder rather than let her tits fly and leave herself open to attacks. The series includes other subversions of tropes that were popular at the time each book was written, including a badass barbarian who just so happens to be geriatric, and a group of druids who are programmers and they use their stone circle as a supercomputer. My point is, Pratchett doesn't base his stories solely on tropes. Tropes can be a core theme of his characters and stories, but he plays with them, twisting them this way and that, making you question them and making you think. One big way he does this is through parody. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, a parody is a work that intentionally copies the style of someone famous or copies a particular situation, making the features or qualities of the original more noticeable in a way that is humorous. Monstrous Regiment by Terry Pratchett is a parody of a trope that is listed on TV Tropes as Sweet Polly Oliver, named after an old broadside ballad about a girl who joins the army to be with the man she loves. Massive spoilers ahead, by the way, so if you don't want to be spoiled, please skip to the next timestamp. In Monstrous Regiment, we follow Polly Perks, who joins a holy war in order to find her developmentally disabled brother and keep him safe. This holy war was started by the cult of Nuggin, a misogynist god who outlaws a bunch of odd things like cross-dressing, crop rotation, and accordions, though he is later revealed to be a manifestation of collective religious guilt and is therefore essentially dead. Slowly, Polly figures out that everyone in her regiment was assigned female at birth save for one oblivious man, and all of them are in it for different reasons. Tonker and Lofty, for example, are lesbians who joined the military to run away from the abusive factory school that enslaved them. Shufti is pregnant and wants to find the soldier who knocked her up. Sergeant Major Jackrum is a trans clansman and a father. In one critical moment, when the regiment is outed by a military court, Jack Rum reveals that many of the colonels and generals in the room presiding over this were also assigned female at birth. It is also revealed that this holy war has been going on for so long that the nation that started it is running out of men who can fight. When Pratchett exaggerates the sweet Polly Oliver trope by making secret women and trans people in the military be excessively common, he shows us that being a good soldier is about much more than what's in your pants, and that holy wars and the ideas behind them are nonsensical and ruin people's lives. Now that we know how trope-centric stories can be written well, let's improve the aforementioned Booktok stories. How could Assistant to the Villain have been better? Well, one of my favorite movies of all time is Blues Brothers, and that movie was based on a series of SNL sketches. There are many reasons that Blues Brothers is so well loved, including, but not limited to, the fact that the sketches it's based on are longer than 45 seconds and have more than one actor, the fact that it's not afraid to kill Nazis but at the same time be silly, and the fact that the movie understood its audience and never talked down to them. What I'm saying here is that if Assistant to the Villain had a protagonist that acted like an adult, if the villain were actually a villain, and if the author wasn't afraid to play into the weirdness inherent to the idea of a fantasy office comedy, perhaps that would have made it better. In fact, why not turn the whimsy up even further and turn it into a parody? Maehrer could use this to say something about the realities of corporate hell and toxic office politics. Give Evie Sage some literal mailer demons to battle. Give us something fun. The only other thing I have to say to Maehrer is lose the whole "will that just happened" humor. Now let's talk about something a little bit more difficult. How could Lightlark have been better? First, I would nix one of the wildling curses, particularly the one where you kill the person you fall in love with. If you live in a society where you kill your lover, the only way it could function without consuming itself before 100 years would be if most people were aromantic and immortal. Second, I would have Aster work on her descriptions and try to make the scenery be more than things. But most importantly though, I think Lightlark would have been better if Aster put more energy into building up expectations so she could subvert them. There are some great ideas here. Oro the Sun King was supposed to be cold and hollow, but I don't really remember that much coldness in him. I want to see more of that. What if he's the grumpy to Isla's sunshine? That would be awesome! What if Grimshaw were a lot more friendly and personable? He's from the emo land after all, and his name has Grim in it. That would be a great subversion. Hell, most emos and goths that I knew in real life are 10 times nicer than he is. Aster could still include many of the tropes that she had promised in her TikToks. I think if she put in effort, Aster could make something passable that includes all of them. If she wanted enemies to lovers, she should have had one of the two branches of the love triangle show animosity. Maybe Oro could have had beef with Isla's mother, for instance. For the death game, why not actually add in rules and points? That would make it more of a game rather than just the ritual that it appears to be. We could have someone get gravely injured on day one to illustrate how high the stakes are. There are so many good seeds in the tropes in Lightlark that have the potential to go beyond what Aster lists in her TikToks. There are so many good ideas that would work so well if only Aster wrote consistently, subversively, and more descriptively. Listing tropes on your TikTok or your blog is harmless for the most part. Writing surrounding tropes, on the other hand, is harder than most Booktok authors likely either think or are willing to admit, and if not done carefully, will end up in failure. I believe that if you are a good writer, you can pull this off. Some of my favorite books are either twists or parodies of tropes. Wheel of Time is an entire series that discusses what if plot armor was a curse and what if being the chosen one will kill you. Sir Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels discuss relevant topics through a fantastical parody lens. The thing is, these examples are written carefully and critically, taking time to make sure that while they have the author's desired tropes, that they are consistent and they don't talk down to their readers. If you're not critical or careful with what you write though, you will end up writing books with total problems that just don't feel like they are for your intended audience and will ultimately alienate many potential readers. And no, Booktok and its consequences are not the end of media as we know it. There are some great books that I have found via Booktok. Remember when every sci-fi book book cover had CGI on it. Remember those schlocky Harlequin romances? My point here is society moved on from those trends, and it will move on from Booktok trope-centric books as well, given due time. Hopefully, Aster and Maehrer will learn from their mistakes and learn to expand upon the tropes they want to write. I believe that if they learn to properly use subversion and parody, they might just create the next masterpiece. I have yet to find a good book written by a Booktok user, but I have hope that someday soon, one will rise up. Maybe one of you guys can. I believe in you. If you're still watching after all of this, thank you. You deserve all of the head pats. This has been bugging me since I first picked up Lightlark in 2023, and then it boiled over when my family member sent me Assistant to the Villain last Christmas. If that person is watching this, thank you for unintentionally becoming my muse. I hope you find something better to read because there is so much more out there. Maybe you should watch Overlord. What do you guys think about trope-centric writing? Do you think that we can salvage Booktok books? Do you have any good examples of trope-centric books that are well-written or of poorly written trope-centric books? How do you guys think that we can fix Lightlark and Assistant to the Villain? Please let me know in the comments below. I am curious and I would love to chat about it. For now though, I've been Alien Daydreamer and I am out. Bye!